It was a normal Friday, except when the dean's voice came over the loudspeaker and said, "This is not a drill." I remember the exact weight of that sentence, how it fell into the room and made every pencil stop mid-scratch. I was 21 then, an intern helping run the computer lab. But for a brutal hour I felt like I was 10 again, trapped in a place that had promised safety. What follows are 5 lockdowns I lived through or heard about up close, 3 that happened to people I knew, and 2 shorter composite tales built from details that kept surfacing in conversations afterward. These are all true, as I knew them. And where facts turned into rumor, I'll tell you that too. I still wake up sometimes to the sound of those announcements. Story 1. Calculus class. Friday, 7th period. We were halfway through a problem when the announcement cut us off. Our calculus teacher, laid back, the kind who answered questions with a joke, snapped his head toward the ceiling speakers. The dean's voice was fast, clipped. "Lock down, lock classroom doors, get down, no lights." It felt like the air changed at once. The fluorescent lights clicked off, and the room sank into a dim rectangle where faces glowed from phone screens. Someone whispered, "Is this for real?" I remember the chalk dust on the board, the way it seemed to hang in the sudden dark. The first sound came from the hallway, more like an animal than a human. A high scream that turned into pounding on lockers. Then there was a voice, low and bitter, shouting threats. It rattled the metal of the hallway lockers. Our teacher rounded up every single one of us. He pushed desks against the classroom door, yanked down the blinds over the windows, and pulled curtains he'd kept for emergencies across the glass. We pressed into the far corner, knees tucked, breathing hard enough I could hear it in my ears. Panic is mechanical. Someone began to sob. 2 girls in the front who couldn't stop shaking. Their crying made everyone else quieter, like the noise was contagious in reverse. The pounding moved along the corridor, passing outside our door, then stopping and starting again. At one point, it sounded as if someone was whispering to the door, low and close. Words I couldn't make out, remembered now as snippets. "Open it!" Or maybe, "I told you." No one dared to answer. We stayed like that until we heard running feet and a different voice, security, I think, then the distant sound of sirens that felt both impossibly far and unbearably close. The dean's voice came back over the speaker, calmer this time. "Shelter in place. Police are responding. Remain where you are." It took a long time to unclench. When we finally filed out under an officer's hand, a wheelchair of questions rolled over us. Later that evening, someone mentioned that the night shift janitor had found a man asleep in a storage closet on the outskirts of campus. According to what I heard from classmates, he was reportedly carrying a weapon. A rumor said it was a .44 Magnum. That detail circulated like a ghost at every vigil, hot with speculation and unconfirmed. Police records later indicated a man had been detained that night, but the exact story about the gun in the closet remained, to my knowledge, unverified. What stuck with me wasn't the possible weapon. It was the ordinary sounds that became terrifying. Lockers clanging, a teacher locking the door with his own hands, 2 girls crying until their breaths came out in hiccups. I remember thinking later that night, how many everyday things does it take to make a school feel like a trap? How fragile was the line between routine and ruin? If you want more true school lockdown stories told honestly, no glamour, just what happened, consider subscribing. I'll keep these coming. Story 2. First lunch, multi-purpose room. This one started with 4 loud booms that sounded at first like a storm rolling in. We were in the lunchroom. Trays clattered, and someone laughed at a joke no one else heard. Then the booms happened again. People looked at each other. Someone said, "Is that thunder?" A teacher's face went white. Campus security ushered us toward the multi-purpose room, like cattle being moved with quiet hands. Doors closed. Leaders, coaches, administrators snapped into roles you only ever thought they'd play in movies. They pulled curtains across the tall glass panes in the room and lined up to block exits. Adults checked the locks, told us to get down on the floor behind the folding gym mats. The radio static from a security guard's walkie-talkie filled the silence in short bursts. 10-4. We have reports. Hold positions. Rumors spread in circles. Eric and Brandy, who lived near the neighborhood that borders the school, told me afterward that they'd seen police cars racing toward a house 2 blocks away, and a man pacing in front of it, shouting at officers. Word came through that a man from that neighborhood, reportedly a registered sex offender, had been seen barricading himself near his property and watching the school. That phrasing, reportedly, is important. I never saw the man. I only saw kids crouched with their heads between their knees, arms wrapped around one another, listening. The long hour in the multi-purpose room felt like condensation building on the inside of a window. Small droplets of fear forming until they joined into a stream. Teachers kept whispering updates they didn't want us to hear. Adults traded guesses, and every time fluorescent lighting hummed, the sound triggered the same spike of dread. Later, police confirmed they had been called to a nearby residence and that threats had been reported. But much of what fueled the panic at school that day came from what neighbors were saying on porches. Half-true details, recollected threats, a history people brought up to make sense of the present. That mixture of confirmed police action and backyard rumor is what most stayed with me. The knowledge that after a lockdown, a neighborhood's stories will shape how the school feels for months. Story 3. Basement Computer Lab, Internship, Late Afternoon. This is one I still hear in my head like a loop. I was late to take the elevator up. I had been fixing machines in the basement lab, a fluorescent tomb with long cords and humming servers. It was quiet in the way basements are quiet, things hollowed out. The first sign was the announcement over a tiny internal speaker. Immediate lockdown. Secure your area. My heart started to race in a way my body didn't understand. A lockdown in a basement is its own kind of nightmare because there are fewer exits and more places someone could hide. I ducked under the desk where we kept spare keyboards. The floor was cool against my forearms. My phone buzzed. A coworker texted just a single word, upstairs. I could hear footsteps echoing above, then a distinct, terrible sound, a single gunshot. It punched through the building and into my bones. For a second, I thought a pipe had burst. Then someone screamed. I crawled out on hands and knees, and the smell of copper and fabric hit me, not as gore, just the sharp, metallic tang that always follows emergency. I don't describe injuries. It's enough to say what the sound did to me. I ran up the stairs and found teachers clustered at a doorway, faces ashen, holding on to each other. Mr. Buckley, who taught history, had been shot. The story I heard from students as police arrived was that he had been struck while trying to intervene. He survived. He survived and later spoke to us, soft as if his voice might break like glass. Police moved fast that day. Eyewitness accounts filtered through our tired bodies. Someone outside said they saw a man running toward a car. Another said police caught the shooter a block away. Unlike the closet rumor in Story 1, the capture was confirmed by law enforcement. The shooter was detained, and we were told that Mr. Buckley was stable. Still, the echo of that single bullet stretched far beyond the official reports. For weeks afterward, every sudden noise felt like it might be a gun. I would hear a door slam across campus at night and replay the moment of that shot until it unraveled the rest of my day. What I keep with me is not the sequence of police calls or the exact time of the arrest. It's the way Mr. Buckley looked at us in the hospital days later. More tired than angry, grateful and distant, and the guilt that comes with not having done anything heroic. We had stood in a hallway while someone else chose to act. That memory is its own kind of wound. It never closed neatly, even though the facts eventually did. The shooter was caught, Mr. Buckley lived, and the legal questions were set aside for court. Composite-inspired tale 4, false alarm that revealed gaps. This next one is a composite, inspired by several accounts I heard from students and staff across different schools. It starts with a call that shouldn't have been made, one alarm misread, a fearful parent or a fumbled radio transmission. Students were herded into classrooms and closets, teachers did their best to barricade doors, and the principal's voice kept repeating, "We are locking down." No shots were fired, no one was found outside. Yet the lockdown lasted an hour because a glitch in communication meant police couldn't confirm whether the threat was real. I remember the claustrophobia in a room that had been a library and 5 minutes before had smelled like pages and glue. The librarian whispered to a group of sophomores that it was probably nothing. An older student, trying to be brave, pressed a finger to his lips and whispered, "We can't move," like a spell. Faculty members worked phones and radio channels with a kind of frantic professionalism. Later, when it came out that the alarm was triggered by a faulty sensor or an offhand remark taken too seriously, people felt both relieved and furious. The relief was honest. The anger was aimed at systems that left kids stuck in silence without answers. What this composite highlights is less the event and more the structural whole. A school can lock its doors, but if its lines of communication fail, students and staff are left in the dark, literally and figuratively. The fear that grew out of that uncertainty lingered longer than the alarm itself. Composite-inspired tale 5. Bathroom hiding, a split-second choice. This last one is also a composite, drawn from multiple whispered stories. The kids who hide in a bathroom, thinking it's a safe place, only to hear footsteps on the other side of the door. Imagine the fluorescent hum, the echo of running water, the way metal stalls amplify small sounds into giant ones. A group of students had pushed into a single stall and tried to make themselves as small as possible. Someone's backpack covered the gap under the door. Their teacher told them to be quiet, to breathe slowly, to spread a jacket between them so they wouldn't be seen. Then a shadow came under the door. Not a word. Not a knock, just a dark shape moving. For a moment, everything freezes. A student texted their mum with a trembling thumb. The message sat unsent because that feeling of being watched made even a phone seem like a risk. The shadow moved on. Later we heard it had been someone looking for shelter, or someone checking the building, or just a neighbor who didn't know better. The important detail is this. In that minute, those kids made a choice: hide and wait, or try to move and risk exposure. They stayed. Afterwards they spoke a different language to each other, one of small, heroic acts. Who had calmed whom, who had suffocated a cough, who had been the one to gently rub a back until the worst passed. I label these two as composite-inspired, because they aren't single events I can tie to police reports. They're reconstructions, truthful in feeling, stitched from the raw threads of many people's fear. Aftermath, and why these stories matter. Lockdowns do something strange to memory. They carve a distinctive groove into ordinary days. After a lockdown, the mundane elements of school, the bell, the lunch line, the teacher's sigh, collect meanings they didn't hold before. A game of soccer can feel precarious. A hallway becomes a potential doorway to danger. Rumors fill gaps where information is thin, and community stories shape how people move through a campus in the months that follow. There's another layer that doesn't show up in incident reports. The small acts that felt like salvation. Teachers who slammed a trash can against a door, a janitor who locked an emergency exit minutes before an intruder arrived, the quiet way a coach signaled for silence in a crowded gym. Those acts didn't make the headlines, but for the students in those rooms, they were the difference between breathing and not breathing. First responders and school staff often bore the worst of the visible stress, but students carried invisible aftershocks, sleep trouble, a startle at a loud noise, the instinct to check doors twice. And then there's the rumor machine. After any emergency, stories sprout, some accurate, some exaggerated. A neighbor's recollection, a second-hand remark, a social media post with incomplete facts. They all mix into the narrative. I try to be honest here. When I relay a detail that came to me as rumor, I call it that. There is a pressure to fill unknowns with explanations, but that makes healing harder, not easier. So I qualify what I can and leave what I can't verify as what it is, unconfirmed, reported, or remembered. What stays with me is not just the fear itself, but the moral complexity that follows. We want to name an enemy, to box fear into a person or a motive. But many of these situations involve people who were distressed, people with histories, people who might have needed help long before any school lockdowns. That doesn't make the danger any less real, nor does it excuse it. It complicates our response and forces us to ask hard questions about prevention, mental health support, and how we protect the most vulnerable without sacrificing the safety of others. If you're listening to this and you've been through something similar, know this: your reaction doesn't have to fit anyone else's script. Some of us become activists, some of us withdraw, some of us volunteer to help in small school programs. Any of those responses are valid. If you have a story, something that happened to you or someone you know, please consider sharing it in the comments. Not to sensationalize, but to build a truer picture of what school safety means in real life. One last thing, these 5 tales end with different kinds of closure. Some ended with police making an arrest, some with rumors that never fully resolved, some with nothing but the passage of time and a teacher's quiet courage. Across all of them, though, the common threads were human. People trying to protect each other, adults stepping into roles they didn't expect, and communities wrestling with the aftermath in ways that don't make headlines. Give yourself grace if you carry echoes. Honor the adults who stepped up. Remember the students who hid and the teachers who locked doors. If this piece mattered to you, please consider liking the video and sharing it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more first-hand accounts and thoughtful reconstructions of incidents like these. No sensationalism, just the facts as remembered and the feelings that followed. And if you can, leave a comment about your own experience or a word of thanks for the people who showed up in those moments. We keep listening because these stories deserve to be heard.